Good morning. I'm going to call us to order. This is the Committee on Affordability, Accountability, and Planning. We have a couple of members who, one is in transit, late arrival. We have another who had another event come up and will not be with us today, but we have 3 voting members of the committee, therefore we have a quorum. I would like to advise all that this meeting is being broadcast over the internet. If you would, as a courtesy to all, turn your cell phones either off or to silence, and we'll proceed. As information item is for those who are interested in the evaluation of the Space Projections Model Report is now online. It was discussed at our June 29th CAAP meeting and again at the July 21 board meeting. It's been approved and it's posted on the July board meeting materials on the coordinating board website. So if there are anybody interested either here at the today's event or at home, you can look at it there. Our first item is agenda item number 2, consideration approval of minutes from the March committee meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
And a second? Second. Okay, a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? They are adopted. Good morning, Arcelia.
Good morning.
Welcome. We're glad you're here. Agenda item number 3 is consideration of approval of the consent calendar. The following items are on the consent calendar. Item 5G will be presented for approval later in the meeting. The item on the consent calendar for consideration is 5F, consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee for approval of the nominated members of the Financial Aid Advisory Committee. Are there any other items that any member of the committee would like to add or to remove from the consent calendar? Hearing none, I'll take a motion to approve. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It is adopted. Item 4, public testimony. We do not have anyone registered for public testimony. Is there anyone that would like public testimony at this time? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 5A. 5A is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the approval of the 2016 Regional Plan for Texas Higher Education. Dr. Julie Eklund, our Assistant Commissioner for Strategic Planning and Funding, will provide a presentation.
Good morning.
There you are. Thank you, Julie.
Yes, thank you. I'm here. I am happy to be sharing with you the 2016 Regional Plan for Texas Higher Education, which is a legislatively required plan that is prepared once every 2 years. Regional higher education planning is important for reaching state economic and societal goals. Regional level planning can serve to bridge local and institutional planning efforts and state level priorities by providing a scale that's neither so broad that local considerations are lost, nor so narrow that common goals are overlooked. Coordinating planning efforts are vital to meeting the higher education goals outlined in the state's new 60 by 30 TEX plan. The plan report is designed to support regional planning efforts. It provides a range of regional information, such as population projections, workforce supply and demand data, and higher education data elements, such as degree production by program area, enrollment, completion, and student debt. A regional portal on the Coordinating Board's data website complements this report. There, planners and other stakeholders can look carefully at a variety of data elements side by side for their region, as well as compare their regional outcomes with those of other parts of the state. The regional plan is required to include recommendations, and I'll highlight several of those throughout this presentation. You'll notice that the recommendations tend to be general takeaways. This is purposeful. The report is designed to allow planners to bring their understanding of the local and regional context to the planning process, integrating the various data elements we provide in the plan with what they know about their area. Here is an example of the type of comparative data that's provided. The map you see here shows the 10 higher education regions. As you can see, they're color-coded in both the report and in the portal to assist planners in easily identifying their region's data. And this particular map highlights population growth. It's interesting to note that 90% of the population growth between 2000 and 2015 occurred in 4 of our state's regions: the Metroplex, Gulf Coast, Central Texas, and South Texas. This growth trend is predicted to continue. Oops. Using regional data can help planners understand their own educational pipelines. A plan recommendation notes the importance of tracking student mobility within and across regions, and there are several data elements that help us with this. Most of the reports we do at the coordinating board are focused on statewide data or institutional data, sector data, those types of presentations. But in the regional plan, we also show a great deal of data by a student's region of residence, where the student came from. This helps P16 councils and other regional planners to know how their students are progressing along the pipeline. As you can see in this report, some regions are doing better than others on this particular element, which is one of our plan targets to directly enroll 65% of students from high school into college by 2030. We are actually losing ground in terms of this target, which is disappointing. Only one region made some progress since last year. But I'm very pleased to report that thanks to approval from the Texas Education Agency for us to share high school graduate data, we now have a contract with the National Student Clearinghouse, and we're going to be able to track Texas high school graduates out of state to see where they're enrolling. And we have heard recently that there may be more students leaving the state than we'd seen in past years. It's been several years since we've had this data because our population is growing and other states' populations are not growing as quickly. And so this will allow us to see if actually we have a higher percent of students who are going out of state. So we're very pleased to have that new data coming in. There are several recommendations related to workforce data in this report. Analyzing supply and demand is a complex task, as indicators of supply and demand can fluctuate over time and vary by field. Needs can be very local for some fields and less so for others, and there are many different data sources that can be used. The report highlights these sources, but also reiterates the importance of local context. One new data source in the plan is a series of regional matrices that provide information about supply and demand. And we got this information from the RAND report using workforce information for degree program planning in Texas, and many of you will probably remember that report. That report identifies a number, for regions, identifies a number of high demand and low supply occupations in the regions, the particular matrices do, as well as information about high demand, high supply areas, low demand, low supply. So those matrices are a very nice addition that we have to the report this year. We used the Texas Workforce Commission regional job projections in the plan. The Workforce Commission projects that employment in Texas will grow by more than 2.4 million new jobs during the next 10-year span, and another 2.8 million, replacement jobs. Statewide employment projections in the plan are broken out by the level of post-secondary education typically required for entry. So the plan really focuses on those jobs that require post-secondary credential or degree. This slide shows occupations that are projected to be among the top 5 in new openings by region. So you can see some occupations are in high demand across all 10 regions, such as registered nurses, elementary school teachers, general and operations managers, but we also see accountants and auditors in 6 of our regions, middle school teachers in 5, and diagnostic medical sonographers in 4 of the regions. And here's just an example of some information from the RAND matrices that I mentioned earlier by region. Note that these are also color-coded, but some examples include health technologists and technicians, which are in high demand and low supply in the High Plains, air transportation workers in the Metroplex, top executives in the Gulf Coast, and we need more entertainers and performers in Central Texas. Because I guess we don't have enough. Well, that's just one of the categories that they look at. So it's an area where there's not enough supply for the demand for that region based on the RAND analysis. They look at Bureau of Labor Statistics data, and they also looked at American Community Surveys results data to see who is available for jobs and where there's demand. So it's, again, it's a range of information that tells them that that's an area where there's demand. And I'd be happy to look into that and provide you more detail. Okay, the report also provides data on how many graduates are produced by program area to also help us better understand workforce supply. But this information can also reflect demand. Students also often gravitate to fields where they believe there will be employment opportunities. So understanding degree production in a region can inform decisions about, for example, bringing in employers or advising students to help achieve a better balance if they really aren't majoring or focusing in fields where there's there's a need in a region. One thing I think is interesting about this particular data is that 90% of our students are enrolling in 26% of our degree areas. So 90% are enrolling in those areas we define as high demand by how many graduates we have. But we have lots of programs, again, where we don't have that level of graduates. This slide is just an example of some of the data included in the report. We look at 5-year trends by SIP areas. This one highlights STEM and health fields. And one thing that I think is important to think about, especially with STEM, is there are some areas that are high demand, we see high growth, but there are others where we have a large supply and we don't see as much need. I think biology bachelors are one good example where we see those first-year wages are pretty low and we see a very high number of students coming out with those. So this report is helpful in seeing the variation. Regional data can also inform local strategies for reaching 60 by 30 TEX goals. And with the new state plan in place, this is the first year that the regional plan has highlighted some of those 60 by 30 affiliated indicators and included some related recommendations. There are a lot of numbers on this page, but I just wanted you to focus on the statewide total of the bottom. Where we are in 2015 is 311,000 completions. We need to get from there to 550,000 completions by 2030. And I thought it was interesting that we need to, for right now, 2/3 of those completions are in those 4 high population areas that I mentioned earlier. So we really need to focus efforts across the state, but particularly in those areas. And finally, here's an example of some data by region of residence on where we stand with the student debt goal. I was kind of surprised when I saw these breakouts by the variation in this data. West Texas has the lowest debt to first-year wage percentage at 43%, and the highest percentage appears in the Central Texas region at 67%. And this was done by region of residence. As I mentioned before, much of the data we look at focuses on that. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Members, any questions?
One comment, sometimes it's helpful to hear data more than once, but it occurs to me, Julie, that aside from whether we may have an increase in students going to other states, there are a large increase in dual credit, and the number of students finishing certificates and associate degrees in high school may mean more of those students are going directly into the workforce, and that's not being captured in this, and we need to look at that analysis as well.
That's a very good idea.
Question. So, Julie, to that point, David, when are we going to have that additional information about out-of-state and such? Because, I mean, obviously, that number going the wrong direction is concerning. And what were the numbers for, like, the previous 2 years when we got up to the 54 or whatever we are the year before? Do you have that?
Yeah, I can find that. I believe we've been
Statewide was
as
54.
about 55, 56% during the recession. We did see more
Right.
students going directly in. That's dropped some since then. We are doing better than we were in 2000. We have seen some increase, but we are concerned about this drop.
Right.
that
I mean,
we've seen the
and
last
with the stated goal of 65%, we've
Yes.
got a lot of work to do there. And I had one other one I'd like to have is on the total by ethnicity. I know our goal, have I not seen, or do we have it broken down by Hispanic, African American, and such for our goal to hit the 550 by 2030?
What we have in the plan is a target for Hispanic students, for African American students, for male students, and for economically disadvantaged students. So those are our specific targets that feed towards the completion goal. Of course, we'll be tracking all our populations, but those particular ones are targets in the plan.
Okay.
I do want to publicly express our appreciation to TEA, because to track to the National Student Clearinghouse, that we need their permission to use we've had their data, but in the past they were uncomfortable about taking those high school seniors and tracking, and this administration's been very supportive of that.
Julie, I have a really quick question on page 9 of your deck. I noticed that we don't have female, and there's probably a really good reason why, but could you explain that to me, why we're not tracking female?
And unfortunately, the page numbers are very light here. That's the last,
It's actually the very last, almost the second to the last slide.
second to last page. Well, that's because those categories are the ones that I just highlighted. Those are the ones that are the targets in the plan. And when the plan was being developed, the strategic planners heard a lot of information about gender differences in terms of enrollment and outcomes in higher education, and they thought it was important to target males because of the pretty large gap in all the race ethnic groups, I think, with the exception of Asian students, the pretty large gap between outcomes for female students and for male students, which is not to say that the committee didn't think it was also important that we look overall at our balance. We understand that in STEM areas, we still have a higher percentage of male participants, and we haven't seen females catching up in terms of degree production and completion in that area. But these are the particular categories that we have highlighted in the 60 by 30 text plan, and that's why we included them in this illustration.
Actually, for more than a decade, women have been enrolling and graduating in higher numbers. It doesn't mean, as Julie said, that we ignore them, but we try to target areas where we know there's a shortfall, but we still monitor.
Yes.
I know that there are many schools all over the country that make special efforts to recruit males so that while it's not a 50-50 split, it's at least more like a 45-55, or at least approaching that, and it's a struggle at many schools to do that, and once they're in, to help the students stay in. So that this is something that we've been particularly concerned about for a decade. In my previous time at the coordinating board, we were concerned about increasing the women numbers, and in fact, those numbers have increased at the graduate and professional level as well. So it's something you have to monitor all the time. And just as a reminder, with closing the gaps, there were goals and targets we modified as things changed. So we will, as Julie said, been modifying. If we see a trend in the wrong direction for women, we will come to you and recommend that it be added as a target.
That would be great. Thank you.
Commissioner?
Thank you. I wanted to make a comment about students going to college out of state. I've been looking at that data. I haven't looked at the data in a couple of years, but the feds collect data on this issue, and federal data show that Texas is among one of the lowest states in sending students out of state. There have been a lot of reports about students leaving the state because of the top 10% rule and so forth, but the data, once again, I haven't looked at it in a couple of years, that it doesn't suggest that we have a problem. I think we sent something like 12% of college-going students out of state, and I think California is the lowest at about 9%. But it's not a significant number. The other thing, because I hear this so often, particularly from members of the legislature who say we can't afford to lose all these good students, and my attitude is if a student gets into Stanford or Harvard or the University of Chicago, I'm not sure it's not a good idea that they shouldn't go there. I think the trick, and I think this might be something we try to develop as a state policy, how do we bring them back?
Yeah.
How do we, and I think that's the issue. We also, the other part of the phenomenon that is interesting is that Texas is surrounded by states that are losing college-age population, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana. So they're aggressively recruiting students from Texas. And that's probably something that we should watch. But I think that this issue has been probably exaggerated a bit.
I just want to add as a reminder, in line with what the commissioner was saying, that the first goal in terms of 60% we've taken into account that this is why everybody has to work on, because we have to have a good economy. We have to have an economy so that the students we graduate will stay. We've talked about a good economy so others with the educational levels will move to Texas for the jobs, and that would include students who leave Texas to go to the Harvards or Nebraska for that matter. And so it's maybe a little easier to get them back from Nebraska. But these are all things we have to take into account. And so, we could, with our plan, actually, on the second goal, completion, produce the graduates we wanted, but if our economy isn't going well, they may find themselves leaving the state to go other places because there's no job here, because they do need to have a job. So all these things work together, and that's why we have to work closely, not just with our institutions, but with industry.
Well, I also think that there's a relationship between the economy in Texas. So when we have fewer jobs, more people go back to school, and you saw a decrease in the numbers from 2014 to 2015. As the economy got better, a lot of people thought, oh, I'll just keep my job and I won't go back to school right now because I actually maybe got a pay raise or something like that. But there is, I agree with you, Raymond, I see this all the time, these out-of-state schools, so hard coming into these high schools, really recruiting kids. And I was shocked at one of the big high schools up in the HEB area in the Metroplex, how many of those top kids went out of state, but all of those recruiters were there really pulling on those kids.
And to your point, I think if Oklahoma charges in-state tuition to kids, particularly from the Metroplex, my other question is, if we're exporting 12%, though, but are we? Is there a number that we're tracking of what we're importing into the state? Because I do think we have, a lot of attraction to some of our other schools here.
Yeah, we do, and that's in our regular data system. And I would give you the number. The percent of our students that are from other states is fairly small as well, and that's because we emphasize educating Texas students, but we do have them, particularly at the graduate level, particularly at institutions on the borders with other states because of tuition agreements. But we also know, if you recall, with the plan, the data showed that we imported 55,000 students who, from wherever they might have been, who came to Texas because of jobs with the credential classification we were looking for. And that was just for the 25 to 34-year-olds. So all that's data that we do and will continue to monitor.
And you are tracking private schools too, right?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
That's what I thought.
Go ahead.
I'm just finished, thanks.
Okay. Any other comments? The only question I had, you're talking about a regional plan. It's clearly not the focus of this study, but we've talked in the past is how the institutions in a region work together so they don't have duplicative offerings unnecessarily. Is that studied somewhere else by the coordinating board where we're actually looking at how institutions that are in close proximity to each other don't necessarily duplicate services unnecessarily? Maybe they share facilities, maybe they share degree plans, pathways, have agreements where they can, get the first 60 hours at one institution and then finish up the bachelor's degree at the second institution, even though they're not of the same system. It would seem that would be in all of our interests and in our mission statement to promote that as much as possible, so we're not spending state dollars to duplicate the same degree offerings in the same region.
Absolutely. And I know the coordinating board is looking at that more broadly, but in this plan, we do emphasize the importance of people working together regionally. We show data for the regions about degree production. So an institution that was thinking about offering a new degree can look within their region and see whether that degree is already offered, what the enrollments look like. I know working with this data for the plan in the past, sometimes you do see institutions that have very small enrollments in a program where very nearby there'll be another institution that has large enrollments in a similar program. So we really do want regions to be, or institutions to be thinking about how they fit into the regional picture.
That's a very fundamental part of the program approval process. So if you look in your agenda for programs that are brought before you, you'll notice that it will say which other schools in the state are offering the same or similar program. Staff will look at production and a recent program that was approved in engineering. We actually were producing about the same number that looked like the job market was requiring at that point in time, but we recommended approval of that program because it was in a major metropolitan area and it was the only program of that type in the area, and we thought in that case we did need it because of the industry there, and it wasn't going to produce a large number, but it would provide that local contact with key industry. And so that is a basic consideration, and so I'd look at that carefully, and it does go along with here. In the past, with this report, there have been at least one occasion I know where it was pointed out to one institution that was requesting a program in one area in education that in their whole region there wasn't a single program in another area, and that they might really reconsider focusing on that other area and forget the one that they brought forward, because there were a lot of opportunities there. And when they looked at it, they saw the logic of that and retooled, and that's been a very successful program. So we try to do that. It's not perfect, but, and part of our role is to help schools be aware of other programs. People tend to focus on schools within their own system, and we help look beyond that if they're not already looking at it. And we include privates in that analysis. So in Houston, we would, if Rice is offering a program and Houston's requesting something, we would at least put that on the table.
Fred?
Yeah, I've learned since being on the board just in the last month that there is a procedure where systems and other schools that are proposing programs have an opportunity, I don't know if all the other board members know this, but have an opportunity to comment before it goes to staff, which I think is a very good idea. So if people are thinking about doing certain programs or setting up new schools and things, there is a procedure that the coordinating board has, which I think is very good, to be able to have people to comment, other institutions to comment before for the particular reasons of planning, which I think is very good.
And I think as we study this, obviously we have to understand that the science of incentives called economics has to do with the formula funding. So if we're incentivizing institution to have degree completion or have a student enrolled, and it's a student that formerly did, say, their first 60 hours at institution A, but moves over to institution B, is A, getting a reward for playing fair with others, and B, also getting a reward for actually completing the degree. We don't have that baked into the formula right now, but I think it's something we probably need to think or consider as we move forward to incentivize the school where the student began their studies and where, as well as the one where they complete, because the one completing actually gets the lion's share of the formula funding.
Also an example of cooperation that happened a few years ago, I don't know if it's still in place, is that Rice University and University of Houston both realized they had language programs that they felt were important, but they didn't feel that they had adequate numbers at any one institution to support it. So they provided a reciprocal agreement where students could take certain language programs from University of Houston so that Rice wouldn't have to expend the money to support it and vice versa. So I think we have instances of that around the state where people work together. Community colleges with certain courses would beam in courses from another school, and their local faculty would help with that, but it was actually offered by another institution where they had faculty member with that expertise, and then they would share the revenue in that, in an agreement they worked out amongst themselves.
And we also do, under our success points, I know it's a small % of the formula pie, but for students who transfer from 2 to 4 year, those 2-year institutions do get credit, get some points for funding for those transfers. But again, that's a small group.
Okay, motion and a second for adoption. Been moved and seconded. Janelle and Arcelia. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It is adopted. Item 5 Bravo is consideration of Commissioner's recommendation to committee relating to approval of progress report on State Higher Education Plan 60x30 TX. Mr. John Wyatt, Director of External Relations, will have a presentation of overview of the report. Mr. Wyatt.
Good morning. I'm going to present an overview of the first annual 60x30 text progress report. I will present the overview, but obviously 60x30 text is kind of an agency-wide effort. So if there are questions about the data, Julie will be ready to jump in, or I can call up folks as needed. So this report is actually a statutorily required report. It's due to the legislature by December 1st. Usually during closing the gaps, the report was adopted during the June and July meetings, and we will return to that schedule next year. Terming this first one a progress report is a bit of a misnomer because 2015 is the first year of 60x30 text, and we just now have 2015 data. So what we're presenting here is not going to be a multi-year comparison of how we're progressing under the plan. However, we can show where we were on our targets when the plan was being developed versus where we are in this first base year of 60x30 text. So this slide here shows the goals and targets of 60 by 30 techs. The column on the far right is where we stand for the base year, so the 2015 base year for 60 by 30 techs. The data on the left column is the data that was used in development of the 60 by 30 report. That data could have been anywhere from 2012 to 2014, depending on what was available. If you'll look at these measures, you will see, compared to what was developed or what was used when developing the report, we have made progress, or we have increased on almost every measure. The one where you will notice a decrease is on the Texas high school graduates enrolling in higher education directly from high school. That has had a decrease for the 15 base year. And as I mentioned, though, when we're actually measuring our progress on 60 by 30 techs going forward, it will be from that 2015 base year that we will measure.
John, just so I'm following this, you have 52.7% reported in your baseline, but these are only those that register in Texas higher education, not those out of states that we were talking about.
That is correct.
Okay. Is it our plan to go back and then add those in that are out of state and count them as enrolled?
Well, if we do that, we would have to look at where we are in terms of our target for 2030, and we've always said this is a living plan, and we will review our targets and goals moving forward if we think adjustment is needed. We don't know for sure that we will have that National Student Clearinghouse data continuously because it's fairly expensive, so I think that'll be a conversation that we'll need to have. But for now, none of the, all of the targets and goals where we need to be in 2020, 2025, and of course the goals for 2030 have not changed. They are what are in the plan. So we would just be tracking the methodology for the high school to college that we'll use at this point will be those going in Texas, going to college in Texas from Texas
Bobby?
higher education.
But if what the commissioner said is at 12%, so that added to the 52, that puts us really close to the 65, which is the goal. And so I understand all of that, and I understand comparison to comparison, but I'm also more interested in what's the real number that we want as far as, people enrolling.
Absolutely, and when the decision was made by the Strategic Planning Committee to come in at 65%, it was with the understanding that we only had the data for students going to higher education in Texas. So with the understanding that about 10% do leave the state. So if we make an adjustment, it will certainly be, and if we're confident that we'll have that data, we'll certainly move up the percentage that we're striving for, because we know from the calculations we did for what we need to get to all of our goals that we need to increase the population going into higher education.
Okay.
Julie, is this including any student who graduates from high school but then waits a year and then goes to college, or this is straight from high school to college?
This is straight from high school to college, and research suggests that generally students who wait are less likely to enroll and also can struggle with readiness in terms of, especially in areas like math. So we've always looked at, although it's important for those students to come back into higher education and we need those populations to reach our goals, and we have a number of large number of students who do that, it's still, I think, important to track those students going directly from high school to college. They tend to be our most successful students in terms of reaching their goals for degrees and certificates.
What about adult learners? Are you going to measure those? For instance, anybody under 30 coming back to college, are you going to measure that?
Adult learners would be included in our completions, of course, when we look at completions in the goal, and we can certainly look at age ranges for where those students are coming from, but we're including all adult learners in the completion goal.
Please continue.
Thank you. One of the primary efforts of the past year has been outreaching to stakeholders regarding the plan. If the plan is going to be successful, we're going to need our stakeholders to have buy-in and to be active participants in implementing 60 by 30 techs. These stakeholders include state office holders, legislators, our institutions of higher education, public education, employers and the workforce, as well as media and the public at large. One of the primary ways we have been and will be engaging our legislative stakeholders has been through our policy and budget recommendations. As you know, the board adopted recommendations for legislative recommendations for the upcoming legislature. You had 3 categories. I won't go over them all, but your Category 1 recommendations, which were your major policy and budget recommendations, were coordinating the expansion of higher education, increased oversight of career schools and colleges, improving the efficiency of financial aid, and instituting outcomes-based formula funding. And then you also had a set of budget recommendations that you adopted. Adequately funding higher education obviously is very important to all the goals of 60 by 30 techs. So this board has recommended to the legislature that formula funding be increased in 18-19 to account for student growth as well as inflation. And has also put an emphasis on outcomes-based funding, both increasing funding for community college student success points, as well as instituting outcome-based funding for universities through the graduation bonus. Another element of implementing 60 by 30 techs has been institutionalizing the 60 by 30 techs identity within the agency. Our 60 by 30 techs logo and identity has been integrated into all of the work product that comes out of this agency, whether that be overviews, press releases, social media tags. 60 by 30 has become at the core of identifying us as an agency and how we present ourselves to the public and outside stakeholders. We have also institutionalized internally the messaging regarding 60 by 30 techs so that when we present information, when we make presentations regarding the plan, we're consistent across all of our presenters. And speaking of presentations, we have had an aggressive schedule over the last year of getting out into the state and making sure that stakeholders are informed regarding the plan. There are 7 regional 60 by 30 techs workshops. 6 of them have already happened. And we have one coming up in Lubbock in which we have had local representatives from IHEs, public education, employers, local elected officials participate in educating them about the plan, but also importantly getting their feedback about how they can implement the plan locally. We've made presentations to boards of regents and boards of trustees. We have participated in hundreds of conferences. Staff at different levels have presented at conferences across the state. Those have included TAB, the Austin Chamber of Commerce. We hosted TAB Lab and the Marketable Skills Conference, then the Governor's Education and the Workforce Summit a couple of weeks ago. And also, the 60 by 30 techs plan has been an integral part of the governor's tri-agency agenda. As you know, he charged TWC, TEA, and the coordinating board with addressing 5 charges, one of which specifically was about 60 by 30 techs.
John, why don't you summarize what the governor said in his remarks about 60 by 30 Texas?
The governor at the Education and the Workforce Summit spoke very highly of 60 by 30 techs. He essentially said it was the blueprint for ensuring that our state can meet its goals for being prosperous in economic development going forward. And he also, as you may recall, launched 60 by 30 techs at a press conference in, I think it was November of last year.
He mentioned we had a little receiving line, and he made a couple of comments to everybody, and he told me that he had actually read the draft report of the tri-agency, or the draft of the tri-agency report, and he thought it was quite good, and that he complimented the 3 agencies, and he told me that he knew that the coordinating board had taken the lead on preparing the report, and he was very pleased. He's very complimentary.
In regards to media, as I mentioned, the plan was launched at a press conference with Governor Abbott in November of last year. There have been 62 specific media coverage opportunities regarding 60 by 30 in both state and national press, as well as more than 100 mentions of the plan across a broad range of media. The 60by30techs.com website is a project currently underway, scheduled to launch in January of 2017, coinciding with the start of the legislative session. This is funded by a grant from the Gates Foundation, and it will develop an interactive website that will provide stakeholders with data that is statewide, by region, by institution, and by goal. So this will really provide a landing page for people to to learn about the plan and to kind of take a deep dive into the data, as they will. The audience includes a variety of stakeholders, students and parents, legislators, employers, public education, et cetera. It will have interactive data that will be continually updated as it's available, as well as hot topics. And I just learned this morning that the Texas Tribune has agreed to promote the 60by30text.com website on their website.
John, on that, we have another website called GenTX that I think has probably been underutilized. Is this going to be linked to that? We're still going to have the focus of GenTX, try to define what the jobs are out there and how you attain higher education that puts you in a position to take those jobs?
Actually,
Or is this going to duplicate that or take over all that?
I'm going to ask Kelly to come up just to address that.
So initially, we will just have the site, it will be powered, so to speak, by the new 60 by 30 text accountability site. That's where the deep dive data will be, and this will be that soundbite data, the higher level. We will link to the agency website, and eventually, when we have our new web administrator on board and we have all of our websites kind of cleaned up and modified so that they do show the 60 by 30 text links, we will link to those and add those to the pages. So this 60 by 30 text.com website will be a living website, so to speak. We will keep adding information and expanding it as we have it.
So there's not going to be taking the content out of GenTX and putting it on a 60 by 30?
No, we want this to be a clean site, so to speak, so that it relates the 60 by 30 text information in soundbite is the best way for me to describe it. If you think of a TV news story, this will be those sound bites of information, but we will have links to the other websites so that everything will work together, but we don't want it to become so cluttered that you can't find anything on this particular site. We want to be able to have a roadmap, so to speak, of from this site to the GenTech site or the Advised Tech site or our home site.
What Kelly's talking about is it's very hard to resist the temptation to overload a site with too much information, in which you really end up with none because it's not apparent what you want people to see. And inferred by an earlier statement is we are beginning a process to review all of our websites and perhaps eliminate some so we can put more effort into driving traffic to those sites we have. So GenTex, by the way, we have revitalized, but we also have a College for All Texans. We have a lot of websites, and we are going to probably eliminate some of them and consolidate them. And even in terms of data, if you look at data now, we've got far too much data on that first page, and we have to focus on what we want people to see, but at the same time still have the other data available. And so it's going to be a constant challenge and a monitoring of how much people use certain things. And so we're grateful that John's area is going to add somebody to provide someone who regularly focuses on this, which we haven't had for probably 8 or 9 years. So that's going to help a lot.
And it will take some time.
I completely agree. It should not be on the website, but there ought to be a link saying
Yes.
for future students and parents, what do you need to do? How do you prepare for your job?
We will
and then
definitely
it goes
have
to
links.
GenTX, and then you've got a much more robust listing that we have now. I've challenged the people in the manufacturing sector and the petrochemical sector to give content to the folks that run the GenTX website and advertise. Those are high-paying jobs, and yet they're not there, and so young people don't have a concept of, well, I could go with an associate's degree or a technical certificate. I could go get a really good-paying job, and I don't have to go get a bachelor's degree.
And one way that we would be able to do that is with Hot Topics. GenTex has several events. They'll have a FAFSA event coming up in November, and then the college signing day in May. So those would become hot topics where on the home page of the 60by30text.com site, we would be able to feature GenTex, and in the narrative next to whatever image we have in that hot topic, we can have a narrative with a link to the GenTex site. So we would have a way to drive to that site with the hope that then they come back. That's one reason why we'll have hot topics, to keep people coming back and learning more.
Yeah,
When do you plan to onboard your webmaster?
We actually are in the process of that right now. We have the cutoff for submitting applications was a couple of weeks ago, so we're evaluating those right now. So we should have that fairly soon.
David?
On another side of this, and it doesn't fit here directly, but it's very much related, in the tri-agency report, the commissioners from the 3 agencies, one of their recommendations is to have a common portal for some of the key elements you're talking about across the 3 agencies, and the agencies are working with a group at UT Austin, a data visualization group on that, and Harrison Keller's a project he has with counselors. So there are a number of things that are going on that are going to complement each other. Julie's staff is working with the Workforce Commission on Texas Cruise, which gets directly at workforce data and opportunities. They also have a site called a Reality Check, which will take you through a series of questions which says, well, when you graduate, do you want to live at home? Do you want to live in an apartment? Are you going to drive a car? Are you going to ride a bicycle? Here's how much it's going to cost you if you want to live there and live that lifestyle, and helps you bring some, it's a reality check in terms of what you can really do with what kind of job. And then we'll be tying that in later with, as we talk about debt and marketable skills. So there are a lot of things that we're trying to find out how to fit together in a meaningful way so students and their parents can make better decisions.
Lifestyle, economic literacy.
I like that.
Please continue, Mr. Wyatt.
Thank you. The final element that I'll note is that the plan does include, or the report does include information on local adoption efforts. As I mentioned, 60by30text is going to really require our stakeholders to kind of grab onto it and make it their own, and to identify strategies for adopting the plan and implementing it locally. Just through our regional meetings and what we've been out and about for the last year, we've discovered that in El Paso, the Council on Regional Economic Expansion and Education Development is actually in the process of creating a local strategic plan for implementation of 60by30text. The Texas Affordable Baccalaureate program, which supports all 4 goals of 60by30text, is in the process of expanding from 2 programs currently to up to 10 programs. The University of Texas Arlington launched a transfer UTA program that ties in directly with 60by30text, which provides pathways for community college students to transfer into UTA. And then the Rio Grande Valley Focus organization is crafting a strategic plan specific to that region to tie in with 60by30text. And that's just a sampling of some of the efforts that are underway locally. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
So the first question I have, John, is this plan, if adopted today by this committee, does that become the plan, or does it go through the board for adoption before it's actually released in this final format?
It would have to go to the full board for their approval.
This report,
We
yeah.
would be
This report.
recommending adoption at the board meeting to follow.
That is correct.
Okay.
And this
just
is
a
a
report,
report.
yeah.
Yes, it's a report, right. So, but next year, we would do this in the June, July board, or committee and board meetings?
That is correct.
And so that would be the new annual, that would reset
That
the
was,
new annual?
yes, and from then on, we would be adopting in
Will
the
we
summer.
have the previous year's data by June, July?
Yes, we will.
Okay. Members, any other questions? Sir?
I wanted to call attention to a PowerPoint presentation that you just received a few moments ago. I thought it would be useful to talk about this document in the context of the 60by30 update. This is a study that was done at the Center on Education and the Workforce at Georgetown University. You'll recall that data from this center was instrumental in helping us craft the 60by30 plan. And I just wanted to very quickly point out some of the most salient findings in this plan. if you look at the third slide, job growth by education level, what this center did was it took a look at the data regarding the number of jobs that have come back into the economy since the recession ended, and these data are startling. For example, on that third slide, out of the 11.6 million jobs created in the post-recession economy, 11.5 million went to workers with at least some college education. This report looks at two phenomena. It looks at the number of jobs, new jobs that were created in the post-recession era, and then it takes a look at the number of jobs that were recovered. And what is striking about this is that most of those jobs that were lost will never come back. For example, the automobile industry, which lost many tens of thousands of workers. You'll recall that last year was the most profitable year ever for the automobile industry, and they did it with a much smaller workforce. And the point of this report is that that's exactly where the national economy is going. So out of 11.6 million jobs, 11.5 required some form of post-secondary credential. And notice that employment of workers with a high school diploma or less only grew by 80,000 jobs.
That's the most impressive of all the numbers.
And if you, the next slide shows a chart and the rate of recovery, and then the next slide shows a change in workforce composition. The Great Recession decimated low-skilled, blue-collar, and clerical jobs. The recovery added primarily high-skill, managerial, and professional jobs. And as I said, the point of the study was those jobs aren't coming back. And then the next slide once again shows the tremendous growth in jobs with bachelor's degrees, and you see the decline in jobs that require only a high school diploma or less. And then you can see that production, on the next slide, production industries employed nearly half of the workforce in 1947 compared to only 19% today. So it seems to me that this report, which only came out a couple of months ago, shows more than ever the importance of reaching the goals of 60 by 30 Texas. Notice that the next slide, the job change by industry, consulting and business services added the largest number of jobs, while manufacturing added the second most. But these are advanced manufacturing jobs. These are workers that know how to run robots and so forth, and that's quite significant. Then the next slide shows on a positive and negative scale the growth of jobs and the loss of jobs. So this is a future. And if you look at the slide, it's next to the last slide called Conclusion, points out that we're in the middle of two different job recoveries, and the workers with the most education have access to the largest number of jobs. And for the first time, bachelor's degree holders now earn the largest share of income in the economy. So.
Was this report created for us?
No, this was.
But we've got our brand on these slides here.
Well, we did that just to.
And the commissioner has integrated this report and some of these slides into many of his presentations regarding 65.
Yeah, I'm wondering, and at least out loud, is when we do have our new website up, maybe this would be a resource on there, because it's very, very telling. That is there any state that has a coordinated plan like we do? And if there are, what are they doing well that we could emulate, or what are they not doing well that we are?
I look at a lot of strategic plans, and many states do have them. I know that Massachusetts developed one about a year ago, and some are focused on specific sectors. For I know that California just came up with a plan for the development of community colleges, and including offering bachelor's degrees. But yes, states do come up with strategic plans, and we do take a look at them.
But as far as you know, no one has the focus that we do of attainment resulting in employment.
No, actually, at least 2 or 3 states have adopted a similar percent in terms of the number of graduates they want in the same time period. But many of the plans, interestingly enough, look a lot like closing the gaps. I think prior to closing the gaps, many plans would have 50, 60, 80 goals for the states. It was hard to know what they were about, and so they've actually, I think to some extent we led the approach to state plans in some way. So there wasn't somebody there for everybody, which used to be the case.
Yeah.
And so, but I do want to point out that we've worked with Georgetown for at least 2 or 3 years. We've had people from their staff meet with our strategic planning committee when we were developing the plan. We've had them come to our regents meeting at least twice. Jeff Stroll in particular has come. I'm not sure if he's presented to the board, but I know he's presented at least at the regents meeting, I believe, twice now, Mary. They played a significant role in the early days of the strategic planning committee, and there have been at least a couple things we've helped them with in reverse, because we have been focusing on this in a way that many states had not been previously.
Yeah, I think the problem with 50, 60, or 80 goals is when everything's important, nothing's really important. And the
Exactly
beauty
right.
is the simplicity of this plan, which is 4 overarching goals. And so everything focuses on those 4.
Right. And it's not to suggest that there aren't some other things that are important, but don't come to the same level of these, and they're doing fine. It really fits in with the concept of, are we looking at women or not? Well, we are, but we don't see a strategic issue there of the same magnitude right now, but we will monitor. And I think you'll recall with closing the gaps, we modified our enrollment goal after the first 3 years, because with the changing demographics, we saw that 500,000 more students was not going to be enough. So the board modified that upwards. We modified our research goal, given some data issues. We modified our African American target to increase it. So I think one thing this board has done very well is it's developed plans it pays attention to regularly and knows it's a living plan, and if you have to pay attention to it and make some key modifications to get where you really want to go and not back away.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to make a comment regarding, similar to Raymond's comment about manufacturing in the construction industry, just because I live that every day, and engineering. But one of the things that's happening in that industry too is there's a lot of technology that has come to play for us. So we use things like BIM and some other really amazing resources that have limited the number of jobs. And the second thing I would say is a lot of jobs are now dual roles, so we're educating our employees to be able to perform not just one specific task. So that's really changed a lot of the numbers that you see here.
And Dr. Tischer, if I could add, to answer your question on the 60by30text.com site, we have a resources page where a report like this would be posted, as well as presentations and media releases that all tie together with 60by30 text.
Yeah, I think that's great. And that's how you unclutter your homepage.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to require a motion and a second to adopt. Been moved by Arcelia and Janelle seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? I guess on behalf of the committee and certainly the board, we would express our thanks to Governor Abbott for his leadership on this. I know the Lieutenant Governor has been involved in promoting this as well, and I'm certain that the Speaker's office is as well, but their help on this is essential for our success and for the success of Texas. So thank you on behalf of the board. We'll go to item Charlie. 5 Charlie, consideration adopting Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the report on financial aid in Texas higher education fiscal year 2015. House Bill 1, General Appropriations Act, Rider 30, pages 3 through 51. 84th Texas Legislature, Dr. Charles W. Poles, the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Student Financial Aid Programs, will provide a brief report highlighting noteworthy findings. Dr. Poles.
Thank you very much. I'm cognizant of the time, so I'll do my best to go through the next 3 reports as quickly as possible, but want to provide you the opportunity to ask any questions you might have. Each year, the agency provides the Legislative Budget Board with an annual report concerning student financial aid at Texas public and independent institutions of higher education, and I'm pleased to highlight the work of the agency staff and their efforts to integrate greater detail into this year's report. Sections on things like tuition and fees and exemptions and waivers have been added, along with additional details about many of our programs, including how funds support low-income recipients. Summarizing a 150-page report in 5 minutes is a bit of a challenge, but my goal is to hit on some of the key items that you might want to know. While we know that tuition has been increasing while appropriations have declined, Texas higher education remains comparatively affordable. For example, the national average undergraduate tuition and fees for students attending a public 2-year institution is roughly $2,900, compared with roughly $1,900 for Texas students, placing Texas 3rd in the country across all states for least expensive community colleges. 4-year public universities in Texas place 20th for least expensive, and we are 30th in affordability for Texas private institutions. Our commissioner has had the opportunity to testify at several hearings this summer regarding the financing of higher education, and our annual report provides a chapter addressing tuition and fees, including the challenges of foregone tuition due to exemptions and waivers, the cost of regulatory compliance, and the challenge of limited tax bases. Given the very large role that exemptions and waivers play in funding higher education, the agency is currently looking at mechanisms to better collect details regarding the individual students receiving these funds. Our current primary source of exemption and waiver numbers, our integrated financial reporting system, only collects information at the institutional rather than the student level. Because of this limitation, the remainder of this presentation omits exemption and waiver information. Loans in particular continue to play a large role in financing higher education, with roughly 50% of all students financing a portion of their education through student loans. These loans represented just over 50% of the $9.2 billion in financial aid received by Texas students, and I wanted to provide an additional perspective. As you can see by this graphic, loans play significantly different roles for undergraduates versus graduate students. For graduate students, 87% of the financial aid reported in our financial aid database is in the form of loans, which is almost twice the percentage of undergraduate students. Breaking this down even further, we see that the type of institution plays a significant role as well. In looking at the roughly $4 billion in financial aid awarded by public universities to undergraduate students, just over 1/2 was in the form of loans, while less than 1/3 of the $1.8 billion in financial aid awarded by community colleges was in the form of loans. In an effort to demonstrate the differences that funding sources play in Texas versus nationally, I've kind of jammed these two graphics onto one page. Rather than focusing on the dollar amount, the message is rather the order of the funding sources. Notice that in Texas, federal grants are by far the primary source of grant funding, followed by institutional grants in a distant second. At the national level, institutional grants have actually surpassed federal funds as the primary source of grant funding. State grants come in 3rd place in Texas, while they come in last after private grants at the national level. You don't see this same pronounced difference between Texas and the nation when you look at the source of loan funding. Despite the $9.2 billion in financial aid provided in FY 2015 through federal, state, institutional, and private sources, there is still a significant shortfall between college costs and available resources. Now, cost of attendance includes not only tuition and fees, but also books, supplies, room, board, transportation, and other personal expenses related to education. After accounting for financial aid through grants, loans, and work study, as well as the expected family contribution based on income and assets, students still face unmet need ranging from roughly $6,700 to $8,200, depending on the sector. Closing that gap is an important part of achieving our goals of 60 by 30 techs, as it represents a significant barrier to completion. And overcoming this barrier requires more than just financial aid. It requires efforts by everyone involved, students, the state, and institutions, to fund higher education effectively and to keep costs reasonable. A final visual I would like to provide you is an overview of our state financial aid programs. Each program is profiled in detail in the annual report, and this graphic pulls together some key indicators. A few I've highlighted in particular. For example, in blue, you'll see that students supported through the Texas Educational Opportunity Grant Program come from the lowest income families, with an average family income of just over $20,000, and almost 100% of the recipients demonstrating eligibility for the federal Pell Grant. In yellow, you'll see that our state loan programs have the highest average family incomes, while Merit Aid demonstrates average incomes around the median income level for Texans. Overall, our work-study and need-based grant programs have a significant focus on lower-income families, as can be seen by the average EFCs highlighted in red, all of which fall below the cap for the federal Pell Grant eligibility. While the state of Texas has a robust financial aid program to support our higher education goals, we must keep in mind that roughly 60% of students in the K-12 pipeline come from poor families. This creates a growing financial need for our students, such that expanded investment in financial aid is necessary to achieve the attainment, completion, marketable skills, and student debt goals of 60 by 30 techs. I'm glad to answer any questions you might have.
Members, any questions? Janelle?
Hi, do we track, and this may be in the Texas workforce data, do we track employers who do tuition reimbursement? That has become so much more common now as I work with different employer groups. I'm just surprised how many people actually, that's routine for them to do tuition reimbursement.
We don't track in our financial aid database system.
Right.
We don't track to that level of detail. We track to a level of detail that gets at other private grants and employer reimbursement. I don't believe we have anything over in strategic planning and funding either. So that's something we can
It has become
look
a
at.
huge piece of labor market recruitment and things like that, especially for larger employers, which we have a lot of now in Texas.
That might be something good to talk with the Workforce Commission about because of their direct relationship with employers.
And I'd echo that, Janelle. That's a great point, because that is growing. I mean, we talk about internships. We talk about all the different things that business is doing to actually become involved in and participating with. And it's just an example of the tri-agency efforts that were there, where all of these are coming together and everybody's trying to figure out how they can participate to drive costs down and get more people involved.
And it's a tool how companies keep employees. And what I was looking at is you could actually see that maybe if you measured it along it says on the national scale, private employer grants, it's being measured somewhere. So if you put that into our numbers too, I think it would raise the green line, the private grants.
We can definitely start taking a look at that for the coming year.
And I had one other question, Charles. I mean, the number that continues to be alarming to me, and I'm looking for some historical background. 60% of students in the pipeline come from low-income families. I mean, to me, that is one of our biggest challenges that we have to deal with. Can you give me some kind of context? If that's where we are today, where were we 5 years ago or 10 years ago? Does anyone have that? I mean, is that, I would assume that number's continuing to grow, or what is happening with that number?
Yes, we definitely have that number. It's based on students who are eligible for free or reduced lunches, and I believe Julie can provide some historical perspective on it.
Yeah, that number has been going up over time fairly recently. I remember looking at it, and it was about 50%. So, I mean, we're really seeing, I'd be happy to share with you the trend, and that data is available on the TEA website, but it is going up.
I just clearly think that that's one of our biggest challenges, and how do we deal with that? I mean, if we're going to hit 60 by 30, this is a big piece of what we're going to have to figure out how they have access. And I, once again, it ties back to if only 52% of high school kids are directly enrolling, I mean, there's a real gap here that we've got to be focused upon.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Very
I wanted to underscore a point that Chad made, that we have a very significant dependence on federal financial aid here in Texas, much higher than the national average, which is one of the reasons that John White and I go to Washington as often as we're able to at least once a year to talk to members of the Texas delegation and make sure they understand how reliant we are on federal financial aid. These data are really important. As you know, all of you know, there's been discussion among the political leadership about eliminating tuition set-asides. There has been some discussion about simply replacing those funds with general revenue, which would probably work out okay, but we've got some real challenges in making sure we make the circumstances of the educational pipeline clear in Texas, that members understand that the number is now 60% and likely to go up. Need to understand what the impact of doing away with tuition set-asides would be on the access to higher education by poor students, and so we've got a lot of work to do. We've got a very good staff that meets with staff members in the legislature all the time. I try to meet with as many members of leadership as I can, but we've got a lot of work to do both between now and the beginning of the session and during the session. But we've got a couple of very significant issues that are coming up, and we have to make sure that we do everything we can so that they will be resolved in the best interest of the young people of Texas.
David.
Yeah, on the flip side of that, one thing I've noticed from a couple of our 60 by 30 text workshops is that we haven't talked about any type of information campaign to let students and parents and older students know what kind of money is available that we have. We need more, but we did that in the early days of closing the gaps, and it sounds as though there's at least a population that still doesn't know how they might be able to, at least the poor students, there is money, it's not adequate, but there's money available that they may not be aware of. And so we need to think about how to get that message out again, and if we need to go back to a very deliberate approach with that going forward. That's just sort of my preliminary thoughts from some of our workshops.
You and I were talking about that before we started this morning. So the question is that something we can incorporate into the 60 by 30 TX presentations? Is it something that needs to be something standalone? Do we need to just reemphasize something we already have, materials we already have there? Because if they don't believe that they could afford it and they don't understand where the financial resources are, then they're likely not to even consider it.
That's exactly right. So I think we have to consider a number of those things. In the early days of closing the gaps, if you walked into a movie at the beginning, you might actually see a free ad that was provided by the industry in terms of money accessible. You would occasionally hear public free radio spots, PSAs about that. We certainly can include that in our presentations. We need to talk about with advice techs to make sure those near-peer advisors are providing that work with the Counselors Association, but we probably need to think about an actual deliberate plan to do that, and what's the best way.
Seems like it would come under the goal of student debt.
Absolutely.
And explaining to people where the resources are and how to get them.
But at the same time, Raymond's remarks are very important because we've sort of fallen behind in terms of the money available. We have fallen behind given the number of students. So you have to do both things.
Fred?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing what David just brought up because of the fact that, Charles, your presentation 87% graduate students are now taking out extra financial aid. Is that correct?
It's 87% of the financial aid that was provided to graduate students was in the form of loans. Not necessarily that 87% of them borrowed, but
Right.
of the financial aid, 87%
That's
was in the
still a high
form of loans.
percentage. Do we know how that compares over, let's say, the last decade, 10 years or so?
We would have to do, we haven't, this is a new feature that we've been digging into, is the difference between the graduate and the undergraduate. And we're hoping to dig further in to be able to get at some historical, as well as one of the things we're specifically focusing on, as I mentioned, is a better understanding of exemptions and waivers to make sure we understand the impact of that at the graduate level, so that everything is accurately reported. Because we do have a pretty significant data gap right now in our system, because we don't have that detailed level of exemptions and waivers for student-specific information. So we are definitely looking into that piece.
Thank you.
Stuart?
So, David, I guess I was going to make a quip. Well, just send the students, this report that you just sent us, the 135-page, whatever it was. I mean, it's mind-numbing. And so, this idea of trying to streamline, what's available, in some kind of step-by-step process, I mean, it seems really necessary, but there's nothing, or I guess maybe institutions, have people that know this stuff and guide students through this process? Is that what happens?
One of the things, sorry to cut in, one of the things that we'll be talking about in 2 agenda items from now is the financial aid literacy pilot project that is underway in order to try to identify methods to get this information out to students more effectively. Another piece that we're also doing is the Texas Financial Aid Information Center hotline, the toll-free line for the state, is actually being transferred from TG to the coordinating board so that we can take that on and determine how best to integrate it into an overall marketing campaign. So we are definitely have some projects that we're looking at how to expand. We also have the Financial Literacy Advisory Committee that will be looking at how best to get this information out to the people who need it most, which are the students and the parents.
Yeah, I think that it's really important. In fact, I think it was related to the workforce, the grant program where, it's the work off campus program, that in fact there was a great deal of variation in awareness among institutions, whether, it's how to use that money and how to develop those programs. I suspect it's also a great deal of difference in the ability to understand, this very complicated, series of, financial aid programs. So yeah, that's what's really important to get that clear.
Seeing no other questions, I'll need a motion in the second to adopt. Moved by Janelle, seconded by Arcilia. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? It is adopted. Item Delta, 5 Delta is consideration of adopting Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the report on the feasibility of providing off-campus work-study employment, Senate Bill 947, 84th Texas Legislature, regular session. Dr. Poles will provide a brief report of the results of the study.
As you mentioned, Senate Bill 947 did mandate a study and report by the coordinating board on the feasibility of providing off-campus employment positions through the Texas College Work-Study Program with a specific focus on community colleges. It's important to note that during the same legislative session, Senate Bill 1750 was also passed, which required institutions to place at least 20%, but no more than 50% of their Texas work-study participants in positions located off campus. That requirement was separate from the required feasibility study. That's just the legislation. While almost all public and nonprofit private institutions in the nation utilize a portion of their federal work-study program for off-campus employment in order to accomplish that program's community service mandate, few institutions utilize federal work-study funds for private sector employment, and no institutions utilize Texas work-study at off-campus locations. The lack of off-campus opportunities is primarily driven by the significant challenges that institutions must overcome in designing and executing off-campus programs. Off-campus work study requires a significantly higher administrative burden than on-campus opportunities, and most institutions simply are not staffed at a level that allows them to take on these expectations. I liken it to the difference between identifying staff within the agency to tackle a project versus contracting an outside organization to do that project. Contracting that outside organization requires significantly more time, paperwork, expense, much like contracting off-campus employers to provide work-study opportunities. Institutions also face the challenge of finding off-campus opportunities and developing jobs that don't compete with other mandates. For example, the federal requirement that 7% of all federal work-study funds be spent on community service opportunities, or that don't result in the displacement of other workers, which is forbidden by statute. This is especially true in rural communities. In presenting this report to our Financial Aid Advisory Committee recently, they also pointed out the challenge of transportation to get students to off-campus sites, which we'll be incorporating into the final report. A truly effective work-study program is one which creates additional jobs rather than simply providing a subsidy to jobs that already exist. Job creation is not an easy task. As a result of these challenges mentioned, about a dozen institutions dropped out of the Texas work-study program this year since the challenge of meeting the requirement was too great. Despite all of these barriers, off-campus work-study programs are feasible, though complicated endeavors, and our research demonstrated interest in the idea of an off-campus work-study program among both employers and institutions, with the suggestions displayed here of important factors for success. 5 states were identified that have developed state-sponsored off-campus work-study program opportunities, which are described in the report. In particular, Illinois' cooperative work-study program uses a competitive grant structure to allow institutions to apply for funding to develop off-campus programs that are administered and assessed by the institutions, much like the current work-study student mentorship program here in Texas. SB 947 specifically requested identifying institutions that might participate in a pilot program for off-campus work-study. Rather than having institutions volunteer for a pilot, a more effective strategy could be to develop a comprehensive grant program whereby institutions demonstrate their interest and willingness through an application for funding. Institutions that demonstrate that they have the infrastructure to manage the program, the broad-based support from campus leadership and local employers, and a plan for developing, marketing, and assessing the program would be in a better position to succeed than institutions where a staff member simply volunteers. Work-study provides a host of benefits. It provides financial assistance, it provides workforce experience and marketable skills, and it provides the opportunity to positively impact others. While SB 947 did not specifically ask for recommendations, we felt that the research done for this report suggested 3 particular observations that were important to note. The first observation relates to the standard Texas work-study program. Removing private sector employment from the standard program and creating a separate program focused on these opportunities would allow that standard program to focus its efforts on campus, which utilizes an administrative structure already in place at these institutions. Devoting the entire current biennial funding to the standard program, rather than transferring a portion of the work-study student mentorship program, would provide employment opportunities for almost 1,500 additional students each year. The second observation is the importance of mentoring and the opportunity to expand the state's work-study student mentorship program to include academic advising and financial literacy activities. Mentorship can be an incredibly powerful influence, and many of the innovative work-study programs identified by the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators had ties to mentorship. Increasing funding for the work-study student mentorship program through a dedicated funding strategy would impact hundreds of thousands of individuals, and would support all aspects of the 60 by 30 tech strategic plan. Finally, given the legislative reference to a pilot program, the report provides an overview of what a private sector pilot program might look like. The private sector is pinpointed due in part to the fact that nonprofit opportunities are already mandated in the federal work-study program. A private sector pilot would allow selected institutions to work with their local community to build a program that provides students with a career-based employment that addresses local needs while allowing for assessment activities to strengthen the program for future expansion. Creating and funding a private sector off-campus work-study pilot program would allow 5 to 10 institutions to participate in a multi-year project to develop and execute private sector opportunities while identifying how to most effectively scale the program statewide. Institutions across the state have unique structures, locations, and needs, and the feasibility study suggests an opportunity to create different work-study programs that would allow the state to most effectively target work-study opportunities based on each institution's unique situation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions? Please.
Comment. This is probably not, Commissioner, one of your highest priorities. I mean, it seems like with all the complexity and all the difficulty, you know, if you just give the money to Texas grants, you know, our goals would be more advanced than this. But that just, you know, from this is my first cut at listening.
Well, actually, as I was listening to Chad's presentation, it occurred to me that we ought to link this up with the governor's interest and the tri-agency interest in paid internships. The sponsors of the program have to, what's the amount of the student stipend they have to kick in?
The employer provides 50% of the funding, and then the state appropriations cover the other 50%.
So it might be a good incentive, it might be a good way to get corporations to think more about providing their interns an actual stipend to learn the work. It would be a good way to identify potential hires at large companies, give them some real work experience, because this could help us reach our marketable goals, a marketable skills goal. So I think there are a lot of ways that we could fold this into 60 by 30 Texas.
Well, I think there's a reason why so few states have successful programs. I'm just going to say, I agree with you, Stuart, that really maybe the money is better spent because you haven't really produced any outcomes. Or does this get us to graduation quicker? Does this get us a real decrease in, you know, student loan debt? Or, I mean, what is it that we really are achieving by trying to push this program? I think the paid internships, or at least a stipend to an internship, provides you a whole lot more value than just, you know, randomly taking applicants for, you know, who can go down here and help the guy at the pizza place. I'm asking, are there really defined outcomes that we know this is such a valuable program? Just because the legislature said we should study it, do we have to keep it? Or maybe they're actually saying, is it money well spent? I like your idea better.
I think we can do something with it. Back in my campus days, I oversaw the work-study programs, and we had a lot of we had students working in the district offices of state and federal legislators. We got some really good results. There are some problems. There are liability issues, other matters that you have to take care of, but they can be overcome. But given the emphasis on marketable skills, I think we can do something exciting about the work-study program I think you would like.
Bobby?
I just think there's such an opportunity with business out there that is really I mean, they are having an unbelievably difficult time filling positions. And so it's not just that students enter higher ed, it's that they complete. And I think that this program, I'm a big fan of wherever we have mentorship programs and internship programs, because that, I think, it really increases the likelihood of completion. And in a competitive world where businesses are all trying to find these graduates, I think there's a real incentive to businesses that feel that if they've participated in this, they have a higher probability of attracting and keeping the students that have gone through the program.
Do we have that data that it increases graduation?
We do, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, we know that work study
Right.
is the type of financial aid that students graduate at the highest rates if this is kind of financial aid they get. What we don't know is whether that's attributable to working on campus or whether working off campus would have the same impact. I don't know if we have data on that issue. David's coming up here, he may.
If they're actually paired into professions
Right.
that they're interested in and they're doing their studies in, so I didn't see any, well, maybe in the more detailed report.
That is actually an area that we've identified in the agency that we don't have as detailed information as we would like. There is some general information out there that suggests that work study leads to greater persistence, but we definitely do not have at the agency the level of detail that we would like to be able to demonstrate the success of the program.
I was just asking Stacy Silverman if our TG STEM scholarship program had any bearing, and the one thing she said that may be of interest is that while all of them don't have to have the internship, there seems to be success in terms of getting students through to a degree sooner with that program. So we could look to that to see if there's some useful information that could be extrapolated more broadly.
Yeah, I guess my observation, I mean, I agree with Bobby that the idea of a simple internship partnership with, business was probably a great idea. I mean, but this thing doesn't seem like it's working. And I guess the report was kind of like, well, it's kind of not working, but we got the money. And so, anyway, it almost seems like there ought to be a recommendation like, hey, we need to change it. We could do it this way and make it much more simple with fewer restrictions and probably actually produce better results.
And as we were talking earlier, the one thing that we don't have data on, I think would be helpful somehow, if you just think of somebody being off campus, what does that mean? If you're in Houston or in Dallas, it could mean that you potentially spend another 10, 12 hours traveling that you could have been studying, and how to take account for that, I don't know, but that's a disadvantage. And historically, one of the bonuses of work study was it kept, especially at commuter campuses, students on campus. And so how do you balance those two? Because it's clearly important to have the work in industry. And
Always an issue.
that's right. So
Mr. Chairman, I also would add that as I was reading through the report this weekend, I was, as an entrepreneur and an owner of companies, I was shocked at, the more I got through this, the more burdensome this was going to seem to us to implement, as just a private sector institution. But one of the things that was really alarming to me was that the suggestion that the work-study programs create jobs that would not have already existed within our enterprises. So I can't just hire somebody for a position that I already have. Can you speak a little bit to that? And I'm talking about preventing worker displacement. It was in that area.
Yeah, the worker displacement or preventing worker displacement is a specific aspect of both the federal work study and state work study statutes that whether it's campuses themselves with the positions or companies that hire are not to use these positions as a way to eliminate other opportunities. Is not a way, they're not meant to be a way to lay off workers so that they can hire cheaper workers from students. They are not meant to do that. And so that's a key piece, is preventing that type of thing from occurring. There have been some high-profile cases where that has occurred, and the importance of making sure that these are opportunities that add to the mix as opposed to simply replacing and thus, hiring a couple work-study students and thus getting rid of some full-time employees or something like that.
And I guess what I was thinking was more to the tune of that there are some positions within certain corporations where you start at a certain position and train upward. So that was really my thought on that, but thank you.
And if those opportunities build in, absolutely. It's more that you're not supposed to be eliminating, other people from their jobs because you can hire cheaper student wage.
Thank you. And I think just in summary, Mr. Chairman, I would agree with Janelle and Stuart and some of the other comments that we ought to consider, where this funding really ought to go to.
So if we're going to modify the recommendations, when is this report due?
Well, one of the things about this report is that this report was specifically requested to assess the feasibility of an off-campus program. The observations that are in here are provided through this, but they aren't specifically recommendations of the board. So that was that piece of, what is the feasibility? We'd included those observations because of what we had seen across that. But in terms of submitting this, it is due to the board, the state by December 1st, I believe, is when it's due to the state. And so it would normally be approved at the October board meeting.
So on the 6th slide of your presentation, those are observations, they're not a recommendation?
Correct. Those are just observations based on what we had seen as to opportunities that might be available should the legislature be interested in those.
David, you had a comment?
Yeah. Being in the oil business, people who go to school and study it purely in classroom versus working in the real life, it really helps those students to understand what kind of work goes on in the oil field, and it really helps them, graduate faster, because it's such an abstract idea, like design a frac job. People don't know what frac even means, and when these students come in and see in real life, it really opened their eyes what all this oil business is all about, because they never have stepped in the oil field. Thanks.
So,
I guess, okay, in the big report, I mean, it just, which is, maybe I'm cynical, but it's just typical. You have all these problems and all this stuff that I don't really understand, but it's difficult. And then it says, well, but fund it by $18.8 million, and then add another $10 million, and then you add another $2 million to another program. So I'm not sure I would agree.
One of the challenges from the funding standpoint on that specific piece is that in its current state, feedback from the surveys that were done and talking to institutions in other states, one of the challenges is that the funding is so low that it is difficult for institutions to justify the workload of what's going to be necessary to run that. And so that's part of what gets into that is the acknowledging that if, say, a individual campus, if their allocation is only $10,000 for their entire Texas work-study program, having someone to run that whole program is a challenge. So I think that's part of what was trying to be pointed out, was the challenge of the low funding level.
And that, okay, well, that was clear in the report, but it just seems like somebody can come up with another way, because we're all for internships and work experience in college, and but anyway, this seems like a complicated bureaucratic mess.
Another way
Take your concerns.
Another way to look at work study is the ability to lower the operating cost of the college. And if a student is there on a grant money or a scholarship or something like that, and they're able to offer labor back to the college that helps lower the operation cost of the college, as a taxpayer, I see that as pretty good bang for my buck. The student is still getting their education, they're helping the college, our costs are held more under control. So as I'm looking at the millions of dollars, how do I get the best investment as a taxpayer? So unless you can actually show me the outcome data of why I need to invest my millions of dollars off campus, I really like the on-campus plan because it does help students. They still develop, life skills, job skills. They show up on time. They have to commit to a schedule. They have to report to a boss. They learn skills, even though it may not be in the construction industry or the oil industry or healthcare, something like that. There is still value to that experience. I'm just wondering, could we make some revisions and bring it back to the board with the revisions that we've kind of brought up? Or do we just drop the observations altogether?
Well, I'm going to kind of wordsmith this. On page 16 of the big report, the very last paragraph, it says the agency recommends, and your 3 bullet points are there. That's a recommendation.
Yes, and I realized as you lifted it up that we had a discussion internally at the agency between the time that the draft was distributed and this presentation, because my use of the word recommendation in the initial draft was not an accurate term, because you all have already made your legislative appropriations requests, as well as approved an agenda for legislative proposals. And so I should have used the term observation in the report as opposed to recommendation.
So if we were to amend that so I can get this group to adopt it, how would that last line read? That the agency has the following observations as options for the legislature to adopt?
To consider, and also I guess the question would be if we do have time between now and the board meeting, if you would like to see revision of this, that is absolutely possible. If you would prefer that it take less of an observational approach and more of just a purely off-campus work study, here are the challenges to off-campus work study, it can take that approach as well.
I'm looking at the vast right-wing conspiracy over here. Is that going to be acceptable, or do you want to wordsmith it today? And
I don't really. I suspect if we didn't put it in our higher priorities, I'm not sure it's going to get funded. If it gets funded, whatever. But I think it seems like there's a consensus that internships and work experience is important. It seems like, and whether it's on campus or off campus is probably better, but it seems like there's another program but I think it would require much more study than we have before December 1st to come up with a recommendation. Hey, it sounds like, that this was like a pet project of some legislator or something. Sounds like a good idea, let's do it, here's some money, and then it never kind of got off the ground. Anyway, I'm fine with it, although I think the internship work experience is important, and it would be nice to come up with a recommendation, maybe for the next legislative session after this one, some other means. So I'm fine with an observation and take the recommendation out of it.
Janelle, you feel similarly that we could amend the last line there?
We could also add some other observations, so that would be, I don't think the observations that are in here currently really are expressing the views of the board.
Okay. So do you want to amend this, adopt it, and then wordsmith it before the board meetings?
I think they can bring it back. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, just the revision based on our comments here today should be able to bring it back to the board in October.
So are you prepared to make a motion that we return it to staff and bring it to the full
I so
board?
move, yes.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to return it back to the staff, and then we'll take it up as a board item and not bring it back to this committee. That way it will be due on time. Anybody opposed to that? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, it is returned to the staff, and it will be at the next board meeting. Thank you very much. Item Echo is consideration adopting Commissioner's recommendation to committee relating to the report on student loan default prevention and financial aid literacy pilot project, Senate Bill 680, 83rd Texas Legislature, regular session. Dr. Charles Pohl, Assistant Commissioner for Student Financial Aid Programs, and Brian Ashton, Director of Student and Institutional Success at TG, will provide a brief report and be available for questions. Gentlemen.
Thank you. Senate Bill 680 from the 83rd Legislative Session authorized the Texas Student Loan Default Prevention and Financial Aid Literacy Pilot Program. While specifically requiring participation of one institution from each of 4 educational sectors, the program has benefited from the insight of a dozen institutions, 9 of which continue to participate in the program. Back in April of 2014, the coordinating board entered into a memorandum of understanding with TG to provide the services to support the program. And since you're probably tired of hearing me talk, I'm pleased to introduce Brian Ashton, Director of Student and Institutional Success at TG, who will provide you with greater detail regarding the success of the program.
Thank you, Dr. Paulson. I would like to thank Dr. Paulson, the coordinating board, for their partnership in this program, and the members of the committee for hearing a brief overview of some of the successes that we've had over the last year, as well as some of the learnings. And I think that given that it's a pilot program, are just as important to highlight. And so we're going to spend some time today going through that. Wanted to start with a quick overview of the features that we have within the program. And so we've kind of grouped our features with institutions into 3 buckets. The first is institutional planning, and so doing default prevention plans on each campus that we've had the opportunity to work with. The second is direct service delivery through digital and group means, and so this is really providing online resources to students in that on-demand fashion to help them get information at the time that they need to make appropriate decisions. The next side is to then provide some more personalized approach to financial education, and so this is providing group sessions of different financial topics, as well as providing personalized one-on-one financial coaching. We've seen some very strong success throughout the last year, and so we've seen what we feel to be very strong numbers in a variety of different areas of service delivery, including our one-on-one coaching sessions as well as our presentations, and I'll move ahead to that slide. But we've also seen high customer satisfaction scores throughout, and that really aligns with what we're hearing directly from students, which is the desire to have these services implemented on their campuses. We feel that we've seen good growth in knowledge gain as well, and that short-term knowledge gain that we've seen assessed has grown upwards of 24 points on pre- and post-test amongst the students that we've served. As we've worked through this, we've also implemented a program where we put financial education consultants onto campuses. And so these individuals are working one-on-one with administrators to help provide them with the campus capacity to actually continue to drive these programs throughout the year when we can't, as TG, be on the campus. From that, as well as through a variety of focus groups and other informational gathering processes, we've seen a lot of practices develop that we think are powerful and impactful. And the biggest lesson learned or promising practice that I think we've seen is the idea of student finances are a campus-wide issue, and this issue really moves beyond just financial aid. We've talked about it a little bit with some of the work study and student success metrics, but the biggest reason that we've seen reported in many national studies as well as in conversation with students is that self-reportedly finances are the biggest reason why they're not continuing in school. And so having the ability to provide some of that support both on the proactive side of actually doing education, but also on the reactive side of providing some of that one-on-one counseling to help make the tough decisions, we found to be very, very impactful. We have seen some barriers to that implementation, though, and so, obviously change in higher education institutions can take time, and as we move through this pilot program, we've seen growth and success, which we think is very promising, and we feel that the longer that we're on campus and the more we can ingrain this into the full campus fabric beyond just financial aid offices, the more successful we'll actually be in terms of implementing these programs. We've also learned quite a bit about how to best reach students, and so what we're realizing is that very often the information that we need to present to them is just in time, and we need to get it to them when they're making decisions. And so I think it was discussed earlier around the idea of talking about when are students making financial aid decisions, when are they making decisions to borrow or not to borrow, and that's when we think we have great opportunity to really help inform students as they navigate that process. As we've talked to students, what we've seen are a few common themes. And the first is that they really are struggling to manage their money, and they feel that there is an institutional responsibility for schools to provide support to help manage funds beyond just the department's entrance and exit counseling. And we've done research at TG that proves that the effectiveness of those tools may not be what we would like to see. And we feel that the institution, and students also feel that the institution has the ability to step in and really provide that information that may not be there on behalf of the department. But that information needs to be presented in a way that's relatable to them, and it needs to be presented in a way that we're doing the outreach to the student and getting it in front of them. And so we've worked extensively to provide additional marketing material to make sure that those different pieces of information are arriving, again, when they need to be there. But we're also seeing a disconnect between the students and what they feel that their institutions recognize around their finances. And this is, we hear time and time again that finances are the self-reported reason why students, the largest self-reported reason why students don't persist. But what they're also saying is that it has a strong impact on their academic performance. So we're seeing students who are surpassing buying textbooks because of financial constraints, and that translates into the need to try to improvise as it relates to course materials. Or we're finding students who are needing to work more in lieu of borrowing less, which in addition to times like commuting that were mentioned earlier will detract from their ability to be present in class, but also to study. And so we're looking to figure out how we can help address on the campus some of those broader issues, again, that might move beyond financial aid, but really help the campus to see that finances are an integral part of that entire student's experience and that it really does impact that student's ability to be successful in the classroom. As we've learned this throughout year 2, we're really beginning to look into year 3 and think about how we reposition some of the services that we've developed. And so first and foremost, we're looking to redesign these presentations and the information that we're providing to hit certain points in time that we know that students are making decisions, but also to make it more relevant to what their actual situation may be. And what we're learning is that a 2-year student may have very different needs than a 4-year student and a 4-year private student. So making sure that we're being cognizant of the adaptations that we need to make across those areas. We're looking to support institutions in their development of marketing and outreach of these services. And so again, knowing that there are many constraints on institutions and their financial aid offices in particular, thinking about how we can help reduce that burden to help push out these services to students around campus. And finally, looking to, again, move this conversation beyond financial aid, knowing very well that an individual who's having financial concerns may first present to their academic advisor or to a faculty member, and that those individuals being on the front line can be great referrals into services that can help the student navigate the financial challenges that they may be having. We never expect those individuals to be financial counselors, but we do hope that they can help be primary referral points into broader financial support resources for those students. Again, that was a very high-level overview of some of the things that we've heard, and I wanted to be somewhat cognizant of the time this morning. But there's a much broader report that's been put in front of you, and that dives into a lot of the specifics and a lot of what I think are very strong student anecdotes that we've heard throughout this process that can help support the value of these activities and also support some of the learnings that we've seen and the knowledge gain that we've seen from our students that have went through the different services. What we're hoping now is to then move that forward and continue to evolve the pilot as we continue to learn. And we've, again, received great feedback, not just from the students, but also from the institutions to help us really think about how this can become part of the institutional fabric moving forward.
Brian.
Questions?
Brian, I just had a question. Great report, by the way. I had an opportunity to read the full report. I was quite shocked at some of the default rates and how fast they're increasing. But on slide 4 that you presented, would you give us your opinion on the 3, the personal financial education, the online financial, and then the financial coaching? Just what you were able to determine from the surveys that were done. Are any of those more significant than the other, and do you have any particular information as to which one's working better?
Yeah, so I think they all serve different purposes. And so the way that I tend to talk about this, the in-person and online financial education is really targeted at knowledge gain. And so this is where we can be proactive with students, help inform them of the information they may need to know to make more appropriate decisions, whether that be around borrowing or just general cash flow management. what I see the financial coaching as, and we do see great effect in that, in terms of helping students navigate complex financial situations. We know that finances are an incredibly stigmatized topic, and beyond that, it's also a very personalized topic, and so what works for me may not work for others in the room. And so as to navigate those decisions and to help a student decide, do I pay my electric bill versus buy a book, a lot of those conversations need to happen in a one-on-one setting through a coaching environment. And so we see that as being more effective in the data in terms of actually getting at behavior change. But we also see it as being a more effective reactive solution to help keep that student enrolled as they navigate financial challenges.
Okay, thank you.
Fidel?
Do we have to wait how many years before we actually can compare the default rate with your cohort group with the other control group? How many years are you looking at?
Yes. So, I mean, in an ideal world, we would allow the pilot to run its course throughout the 6 years as, we're beginning to work. And a lot of the work that we've done in the pilot has been to target first-year students as they come in with the idea of we want to provide that continuum of education throughout the 4 years that they're enrolled. And then obviously CDR being a lagging indicator, we would have the years after that to actually see the impact on default on the back end. We can, and we've been talking about looking at different data points in the interim to begin to see progress towards that. So we feel that, beginning to look in year 3 and 4 at enrollment rates, et cetera, can be a little bit of a proxy for default, knowing that non-completion is one of the leading causes of default.
So 6 years past graduation?
No, so we would be looking at a 2 and 3 year marker past graduation.
Past graduation. Yeah. And then what would be the cost to move this out, if you moved it out to even 60 or 80% of the students that have loans?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so TG has appropriated $1.6 million to run the program over the course of 6 years, and obviously as we look at scalability, we would have to do a costing out to see what it would be to scale to other campuses around the state. We do think that there are economies of scale that we can get, and that the startup costs are part of that $1.6 million, but I think that there would be opportunity to take a look at what it would be to reach 60 or 70% of the students who are borrowing in the state, but I don't have those numbers offhand.
So will that be your cost or the state's cost? Because you'll actually be improving your default rate. So would you absorb that, or you bring that back to the state?
So I think we would be open to conversations. As we've transitioned out of the FEL loan program, we don't have borrowers that are currently enrolled at the same levels that we've had before. And so I think we would be very open to the conversations with the coordinating board in the state about what it would take to grow this program beyond the pilot to reach more borrowers across the state.
Thank you.
I'd like to comment on that. Are you teaching these students that there is a cost for default that they have to pay down the line? Emphasize on that finish your school and pay the loans off?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the bigger disconnects that we've seen in terms of conversation with students that we've tried to integrate into the education that we're doing, and that's the lack of understanding really around the holistic cost of default. And I break that all the way down to the barriers to re-enrollment for that student and the inability to in many cases, get back into the educational system, but also just looking at long-term implications to credit scores in those areas as well. It's a big point of the education that we're doing with students, yes.
So I like the idea of the online financial literacy, but a lot of the students aren't really using websites as much as they're using apps. There'd been a conversation we had, I believe, at the last Agency Operations Committee about the concept of developing an app that say, this is how much you owe, this is the cost of default, this is how much you're going to have to pay, this is how much you have available. If you take all of the money, this is what the payout's going to be. If you stop going to school, you're going to have a payout that's going to start on such and such a date. Is there any idea in this pilot of developing an app, which obviously you get a startup cost, but then it's available to everyone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of good data out there that's come from universities around the country that's looked at the effect of debt letters and those types of informational sessions or informational letters that help to inform student borrowing based on projected trends. And so I think we have a lot of opportunity to look at how we may be able to scale that. I think things that we would have to consider would be navigating the data population and some of those items, as well as the development costs that would go into it. But what we are seeing is that there's a lot of value in providing that information to students as they're making decisions.
Well, and the other part, too, that we discussed in that is all we know is what they got from public borrowing.
Yep.
It would also allow them to program in their profile if they had other grants or outside borrowing, so that they'd look at their total debt. And as David was saying, those are not dischargeable in a bankruptcy. They're tied around your ankle for life. And so that's a really critical thing that we have to help them understand. Once you take the money, you're going to pay it back. Julie, did you have something? Go. Or David? Sorry.
One additional comment that we talked about in terms of the app was connecting it to actually academic decisions and the knowledge that, that extra course can lead to potentially extra debt. It can lead to additional cost, delayed graduation. And so we're hoping that we have an app at some point that will tie those two together. And I understand, and you may be familiar with it, UTSA and South Texas College have some grant funding to really connect, not necessarily in an app at this point, but academic counseling and financial aid. Are you including that in your process?
Yeah, and so that's something that we've looked at throughout this pilot, is that idea of really integrated advising and thinking about how financial, academic, and career messaging can go hand in hand. I think one of the key things that we've been having discussions about is the idea of when institutions do academic plans, it's really important to complement that with a financial plan, because we know that one of the biggest ways to reduce the amount of borrowing that a student will take out is to decrease that time to degree. And so there's that front-end planning that needs to happen, but then on the back end, it's how do we help work with staff that may be in a position to inform students around academic choices, that a withdrawal from a course or a drop from a course may actually have a financial impact down the road. And that's where, getting that real-time information, I think, is important.
And I would add that what we were hoping, and we may never get there, is not just the front end, the back end, but all the way through.
Yep.
They have this information to make those choices, because usually it's between the beginning and the end that people are making some of those decisions that lead to bad outcomes in many cases.
Stuart?
Yeah, just following up, David, on what you said. Didn't University, or doesn't University of Virginia have one of these apps? And I thought that was where, the idea of, somebody came up with the idea, and I thought, well, and I presume it's working. And do we have any, is that true? And if we had, do we have any data on this?
You heard from Ricky Raven at one of the committee meetings that his son was enrolled at UVA. And every time a purchase was made, his son would get a text message, and the father back home in Texas would get a text message. So it helped him reevaluate his commitment to economic academic efficiency.
So I misunderstood. It was not an app that shows, sort of financial debt
No, it's
load
like, I'm going to tell your dad every time you spend any money on campus.
That could be effective, though.
But can add at University of Virginia, they have a faculty member that's very actively involved in texting, which could be related to this, and we're working with them on some other things, so there might be a way to see if there's some way to integrate that effort along with
Yeah, I'm just
these
thinking
other
that the
things.
students constantly have the PDA smartphone in their hand. And so if that app is there, it allows them to have a dashboard where they can see, this is where I'm at. And I just think that's where this generation is gone. They're not learning like I did, with 5 volumes book, and you start on page 1 and you finish on page 2,952.
I'm just curious, what's the default rate on the student loan generally runs?
What is the default rate generally?
Yeah.
The new default rates are coming out actually in the next few days, I believe, but I think we're sitting around 13% nationally, Chad. I think we're around that. I can get the Texas figures for you. I can pull those together generally for the previous years and look into the years to come.
Thanks.
This will be presented at the board meeting also next month?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, if you...
Presented for approval or a full presentation? Just so I make sure I know.
No, I'm just thinking that the opportunity to bring back those numbers, it will come up as an agenda item before the board, so I don't think we need a full presentation, but I think that information for, as requested, could be given to us then. Any other questions? I'll need a motion and a second to adopt. Moved by Stewart, seconded by Javid. All in favor say aye. Any opposed? It is adopted. Item 5, Foxtrot, was on the consent calendar. Item 5G, you have a supplemental in golden that has the names of 2 other nominees to the Financial Literacy Advisory Committee. Dr. Pulls is available if you have any questions. It's been moved by Janelle, second by Arcelia. All in favor say aye. Any opposed? It is adopted. Item 5, Hotel, is a report on new regional pathways grants awarded to date. Assistant Commissioner Julie Eklund will provide an overview and be available for answering questions. This is informational only.
Yeah,
Doctor.
Thank you. Just briefly, the Pathways projects bring together teams of faculty or professional staff organized by critical subject areas such as math or reading, or critical functions such as advising. Team members come from school districts, two-year colleges, and universities within a region. They meet regularly, and they use data to inform discussion about student success. This slide shows our 5 existing projects, our long-term projects, and we got some money from the legislature through an exceptional item request to establish 5 new Pathways projects, and up to date, we've awarded 4 new projects to institutions. We've got a Central Texas project, and we have 3 in the Metroplex area, and we didn't have any projects up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, so we're excited that those Pathways programs are going to be beginning, including the Dallas Community College, UNT, UT Arlington, and Texas Women's is also collaborating on those. And there will be 1 more additional grant awarded this year. And then the final thing I wanted to mention is that Pathways is a term that is being used for a growing number of initiatives around the state and the country. You've probably heard of the large guided pathways projects that are happening, and to distinguish those initiatives from our ongoing pathways project, several of the team members and coordinating board staff thought a name change was in order, so we're going to change the name to the Texas Regional Alignment Networks, and we may shorten this to Regional Networks, or TRAN for short, but we wanted to make you all aware of the name change as well as the new awards. Thank you.
Does the name change require board approval?
No.
Okay, any questions? That item was informational. And item 5, India, is a report on facility projects submitted to the coordinating board. Dr. Julie Eklund is available to answer any questions. Seeing none. Next item is 5, Juliet, is consideration of adopting the commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to removing Chapter 21, subchapters Golf, Juliet, Papa, Romeo, Sierra, Uniform, Whiskey, X-Ray, and Kilo Kilo of board rules relating to loan repayment programs to new Chapter 23, Loan Education Repayment Program, subchapter Bravo, Juliet. Dr. Charles Pull is available to answer any questions. Any questions of Dr. Pulls? It's been moved by Janelle.
Second.
Seconded by Javid. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It is adopted. And we are adjourned. We'll ask Chairman Shepard what her intention is to reconvene the next committee meeting. Okay, so it's 11:10. I've been told by the chairwoman that she's going to convene the next committee at 11:15. Thank you.
Point that you and I completely concur, so. Specifically what you're talking about, is they presented at the tri-agency deal last. I was telling Raymond, let's get them on program. Make a presentation.